The Backword of the Cruise of the Snark. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by K. The Cruise of the Snark by Jack London. Backword. The Snark was 43 feet on the waterline and 55 overall, with 15-foot beam, tumble-home sides, and 7 feet 8 inches draft. She was ketch-rigged, carrying flying jib, fore staysail, mainsail, mizzen, and spinnaker. There were 6 feet of headroom below, and she was crown-decked and flush-decked. There were 4 alleged watertight compartments, a 70-horsepower auxiliary gas engine sporadically furnished locomotion at an approximate cost of $20 per mile. A 5-horsepower engine ran the pumps when it was in order, and on 2 occasions proved capable of furnishing juice for the searchlight. The storage batteries worked 4 to 5 times in the course of 2 years. The 14-foot launch was rumored to work at times, but it invariably broke down whenever I stepped on board. But the Snark sailed. It was the only way she could get anywhere. She sailed for 2 years and never touched rock, reef, nor shoal. She had no inside ballast. Her iron keel weighed 5 tons, but her deep draft and high freeboard made her very stiff. Caught under full sail in tropic squalls, she buried her rail and deck many times, but stubbornly refused to turn turtle. She steered easily, and she could run day and night without steering, close by, full and by, and with the wind abeam. With the wind on her quarter, the sails properly trimmed, she steered herself within 2 points. And with the wind almost astern, she required scarcely 3 points for self-steering. The Snark was built in San Francisco. The morning her iron keel was to be cast was the morning of the great earthquake. Then came anarchy. 6 months overdue in the building, I sailed the shell of her to Hawaii to be finished. The engine lashed to the bottom, building materials lashed on deck. Had I remained in San Francisco for completion, I'd still be there. As it was, partly built, she cost 4 times what she ought to have cost. The Snark was born unfortunately. She was libeled in San Francisco, had her checks protested as fraudulent in Hawaii, and was fined for breach of quarantine in the Solomons. To save themselves, the newspapers could not tell the truth about her. When I discharged an incompetent captain, they said I had beaten him to a pulp. When one young man returned home to continue at college, it was reported that I was a regular Wolf Larsen, and that my whole crew had deserted because I had beaten it to a pulp. In fact, the only blow struck on the Snark was when the cook was manhandled by a captain who had shipped with me under false pretenses, and whom I discharged in Fiji. Also, Charmaine and I boxed for exercise, but neither of us was seriously maimed. The voyage was our idea of a good time. I built the Snark and paid for it and for all expenses. I contracted to write 35,000 words descriptive of the trip for a magazine which was to pay me the same rate I received for stories written at home. Promptly the magazine advertised that it was sending me especially around the world for itself. It was a wealthy magazine, and every man who had business dealings with the Snark charged 3 prices because, forsooth, the magazine could afford it. Down in the uttermost South Sea Isle this myth obtained, and I paid accordingly. To this day everybody believes that the magazine paid for everything, and that I made a fortune out of the voyage. It is hard, after such advertising, to hammer it into the human understanding that the whole voyage was done for the fun of it. I went to Australia to go into hospital, where I spent 5 weeks. I spent 5 months miserably sick in hotels. The mysterious malady that afflicted my hands was too much for the Australian specialists. It was unknown in the literature of medicine. No case like it had ever been reported. It extended from my hands to my feet, so that at times I was as helpless as a child. On occasions my hands were twice their natural size, with 7 dead and dying skins peeling off at the same time. There were times when my toenails, in 24 hours, grew as thick as they were long. After filing them off, inside another 24 hours, they were as thick as before. The Australian specialists agreed that the malady was non-parasitic, and that, therefore, it must be nervous. It did not mend, and it was impossible for me to continue the voyage. The only way I could have continued it would have been by being lashed in my bunk, for in my helpless condition, unable to clutch with my hands, I could not have moved about on a small rolling boat. Also, I said to myself that while there were many boats and many voyages, I had but one pair of hands and one set of toenails. Still further, I reasoned that in my own climate of California I had always maintained a stable nervous equilibrium. So back I came. Since my return I have completely recovered, and I have found out what was the matter with me. I encountered a book by Lieutenant Colonel Charles E. Woodruff of the United States entitled Effect of Tropical Light on White Men. Then I knew. Later, I met Colonel Woodruff and learned that he had been similarly afflicted. Himself an army surgeon, 17 army surgeons sat on his case in the Philippines, and like the Australian specialists, confessed themselves beaten. In brief, I had a strong predisposition towards the tissue destructiveness of tropical light. I was being torn to pieces by the ultraviolet rays just as many experimenters with the X-rays have been torn to pieces. In passing, I may mention that among the other afflictions that jointly compelled the abandonment of the voyage was one that is variously called the healthy man's disease, European leprosy, and biblical leprosy. Unlike true leprosy, nothing is known of this mysterious malady. No doctor has ever claimed a cure for a case of it, though spontaneous cures are recorded. It comes, they know not how. It is, they know not what. It goes, they know not why. Without the use of drugs, merely by living in the wholesome California climate, my silvery skin vanished. The only hope the doctors had held out to me was a spontaneous cure, and such a cure was mine. A last word. The test of the voyage. It is easy enough for me or any man to say that it was enjoyable, but there is a better witness, the one woman who made it from beginning to end. In hospital, when I broke the news to Charmaine that I must go back to California, the tears welled in her eyes. For 2 days she was wrecked and broken by the knowledge that the happy, happy voyage was abandoned. Signed in Glen Ellen, California, April 7th, 1911. Footnotes. Number 1. To point out that we of the Snark are not a crowd of weaklings, which might be concluded from our diverse afflictions, I quote the following, which glean verbatim from Eugenie's log, and which may be considered a sample of Solomon Islands cruising. Ulava, Thursday, March 12, 1908. Boat went ashore in the morning. Got 2 loads ivory nut, 4,000 copra. Skipper down with the fever. Ulava, Friday, March 13, 1908. Buying nuts from bushmen, 1.5 ton. Mate and skipper down with fever. Ulava, Saturday, March 14, 1908. At noon, hove up and proceeded with a very light east-northeast wind for Ngora Ngora. Anchored in 5 fathoms, shell and coral. Mate down with fever. Ngora Ngora, Sunday, March 15, 1908. At daybreak, found that the boy Bagua had died during the night, on dysentery. He was about 14 days sick. At sunset, big northwest squall, second anchor ready, lasting 1 hour and 30 minutes. At sea, Monday, March 16, 1908. Set course for Sicania. At 4 p.m., wind broke off, heavy squalls during the night, skipper down with dysentery, also 1 man. At sea, Tuesday, March 17, 1908. Skipper and 2 crew down with dysentery, mate fever. At sea, Wednesday, March 18, 1908. Big sea, lee rail under water all the time. Ship under reefed mainsail, staysail, and inner jib. Skipper and 3 men dysentery, mate fever. At sea, Thursday, March 19, 1908. Too thick to see anything. Blowing a gale all the time. Pump plugged and bailing with buckets. Skipper and 5 boys down with dysentery. At sea, Friday, March 20th, 1908. During night, squalls with hurricane force. Skipper and 6 men down on dysentery. At sea, Saturday, March 21st, 1908. Turned back from Sicania. Squalls all day with heavy rain and sea. Skipper and best part of crew on dysentery. Mate fever. And so, day by day, with the majority of all on board prostrated, the Eugenie's log goes on. The only variety occurred on March 31st, when the mate came down with dysentery and the skipper was floored by fever. End of Backword. Recording by K. End of The Cruise of the Snark, by Jack London.